What's up, everybody? I'm David Hain, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 50 of the A to D From Addict to Disciple podcast. I'm excited about today's interview with my friend Clive Human from Cape Town, South Africa. Clive is the founder of STOP, Standing Together to Oppose Pornography, and for the last 22 years, he has been running support groups for men addicted to pornography. If you'd like to contact Clive, go to his website, www.stop.org.za. We'll get into this episode entitled Stop Pornography when we come back. Welcome back to this episode of the A to D From Addict to Disciple podcast with my guest Clive Human. Clive, how would you define pornography addiction?
Yeah, it's a full-scale addiction. It's like repeated return to the material that turns them on, and becoming emotionally dependent to the stuff, and to the point when it starts actually interfering with your daily life, your relationships, even your ability to function properly in society. And, you move from wanting it to actually needing it. And we got to understand it's an addiction, and it's more than just an intense or a strong interest in the material. It's actually a recognized medical condition. And that actually changes the brain, the body, and causes the person to feel compelled to continue using their substance of choice and to continue to use it even when it's doing so and is causing harm. It alters the body's whole dopamine system. And when a person with addiction initially uses the substance or engages in the behavior, they receive this intense rush of dopamine and many other chemicals, causing those feelings of pleasure and reward. And that over time, the body even starts producing less dopamine and starts relying on the substance or the behavior to feel or experience that dopamine rush. So the body shuts down in that area and allows the addictive stuff to create that rush for it.
So what you're saying, Clive, is the addiction to pornography, this process addiction, is very much like, if not exactly like, substance abuse disorder.
Absolutely. The only difference between a pornography addiction and a substance addiction is that there are no actual outward symptoms. If you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, there are a lot of outward symptoms. Often a pornography addiction, you don't know. It could be the person sitting in the office next to you, on the bus or on the train, wherever you are. It could be that person suffering from a pornography addiction.
Yeah. So easier to hide. And, that's one of the big things with addiction where men or women feel that they can hide it from their loved ones and family members and get away with it without any consequences.
Yeah, little do they know. There are huge consequences.
Yeah, what are some of the effects or consequences that you've seen in people that you've worked with over the years?
I've dealt mainly with men, and it is an issue for women as well. That's a growing sector of the market, that women are becoming more addicted to pornography. But, I deal mainly with men, and like some of the effects on men, men become obsessed with looking at women rather than interacting with them. That it's almost like a form of voyeurism, and they start objectifying the women and the attitude of which the body parts, the women are rated by body part, shape, size, and the harmony of all of the above. Let me put it like that. So they start, they suss out women. They have a fear of real, true intimacy, and the inability. It creates an inability to relate with the women in an honest and intimate way. And even though they could be lonely and have, and loneliness is one of the causes that create guys going into pornography. It's one of those causal factors. But the inability to have true intimacy with a woman, they just rather lust over them rather than, to interact and have a proper healthy relationship with the opposite sex. And, it also has a knock-on effect. And we speak about the effects because of the young age of which children are getting exposed to pornography. They're saying the average age of first exposure to internet pornography is 11 years of age. And in some of the newer studies, they're even saying as low as 8 years of age. And that is a developing brain, so it has premature exposure to sexually explicit material. It's stuff they cannot conceptualize. And they are prematurely sexualized, and they can show, if they're young enough, show all the symptoms of a sexually abused child. That's how serious it is, And I've seen, in South Africa especially, there's a huge increase, 400% of child-on-child sexual abuse, because kids are watching or finding pornography, they're looking at it, and they're acting out on what they see. In the old days, if it was Star Wars when you were a lighty, when you were a kid, you want to go out there and you want to play with your saber, your lightsabers and that. Well, kids are seeing pornography, so they're acting out on other children. And that is creating massive issues, and it never shows any consequences. Pornography, the pregnancies, abortion, STDs, HIV, AIDS, and all that type of stuff. It's never featured in pornography. So they get a false sense of belief. And even men, they just think, well, they can carry on regardless and, just keep it quiet and, compartmentalize that side of their behavioral patterns and just move into another area, when they need to. But it stops, and it just stops them from having normal, healthy relationships. And just besides stereotyping and objectifying women, it promotes adultery, it promotes unfaithfulness, it breaks down the trust in relationships. You start having a secret life out there. And, in all honesty, what it does, it just takes away your own self-esteem and things like that. It undermines you. And for kids, and I've spoken at schools all over South Africa, and a lot of the kids, they see pornography, and a lot of it's by accident when they're doing homework. But they see this, and, they see these guys who are there for a certain, they're not in these movies for their intelligence, they're there for other factors. And they see this and they feel intimidated, so they become withdrawn because they feel they'll never be able to look like that, perform like that, and be like that. So it stunts their whole natural psychosexual development. So it really is a major problem. And also, for if it's a husband, it makes the wife feel that she's not good enough, that he has to go and sit at his laptop or computer and look at all these hundreds of nameless women. And, so they can become guilty and feel inadequate, and they can have obviously a lack of trust and feel a sense of betrayal. These are all issues, I can go on.
Yeah.
They become insecure and jealous and anger and resentment and lose respect for their partners. So it is a really major effects on society today.
Sure. That was a lot of good information there, Clive. Let's stick with the spouse just for a minute here. You had mentioned the pain and the emotions that the spouse goes through when she finds her husband is involved in pornography. Have you worked with the spouses? What do you say to them?
Well, what I actually say to them is that, that the behavior has to stop. A lot of women just turn away and say, just get rid of it. I don't want to know anything about it. Or else they try and ignore it. And that is not what you must do. You've got to draw a line in the sand and you say, this stops now. And the person, needs to be, to want to save his marriage, to want to save his relationship with his family, etc. And, so I tell them not to get over emotional, not to be too, to help, because they can be a huge help in the recovery of their partners. And so I just tell them that I'll walk beside them, I'll give them advice to help them to help him through this situation.
That's awesome. Yeah, another thing you were talking about was comparing the fantasy and the switch over to acting out the fantasy with the children when you compared it to the old Star Wars and the lightsabers and things. And I've run into, as I work with men convicted of rape in prison, something around 98% of the men who've been convicted of rape have a history of watching rapes on pornography and then go or acting them.
Mm.
Have you seen that link between the fantasy of pornography and then the reality of rape or sexual abuse?
Very much so. It is so real. And if you think, first of all, just from a kid perspective, if you're an 11-year-old and you start finding pornography by accident or you start seeking it out, that is grooming you. And if you look, I think in one of the research papers they did, they found that 88% of scenes in everyday available pornography, it shows aggression, physical aggression towards women in 88% of those things. So it grooms kids into believing that physical aggression against women is okay. So if you grow into adulthood, and I've spoken in prisons in and around Cape Town, 2 guys, and I've spoken at various prisons about this issue. And I think the last prison I spoke in, I was in maximum security, and I spoke to a group of about 22 men, of which 18 of them were in for rape and for raping. Yeah, the one was a very famous case in South Africa where he was a waiter at a restaurant and they had free Wi-Fi. And between his shifts, he would sit there and he found pornography. And he ended up raping, he then, it sexualized him to such an extent, he went off into masturbation and then into trying to go out with girls, but they could just read, he wasn't looking in their eyes, he was looking at them and they said, thank you, but no thank you. He ended up raping 11 students. And he said he's sitting in prison today because he got 11 life sentences and 120 years or something like that. He'll never get out of prison purely because he found pornography on his cell phone. And he sat in front of me at a table and he told me that story. And the other guys who were in there, they were saying that, that some of the kids, the younger girls, they want, they're taxi drivers or whatever, and they need a lift to school or somewhere. So they offer sex for for the ride because they don't have the money or anything. So that is created, and that's rape, when they're too young, it's rape. And so these guys are sitting in prison purely because, and they sell a lot of illegal pornography on the taxis in South Africa, cheaply to the kids and that stuff. It's just a method of making extra money, and it's doing enormous damage. But the police tell us also in their statistics that in about 90% of the serious convicted sexual predators, that 90% of them have been found to be users of hardcore pornography. So it grooms people. It's a very serious thing.
Yeah. So what steps would you suggest as you meet someone who wants to break free from using pornography? Maybe they got into it as a child or an early teen, and now you meet them in their 20s or 30s and they just can't break free. What steps would you tell them to start?
David, first of all, they must really want to. That old saying, you can lead a horse to water. If the guy doesn't want to, and I've had that where wives have marched guys in, heard about what we do at Stop, and they've said, now, come on, sort him out. But if the guy doesn't want to, you can stand on your head and, he's not going to want to do it. So the first thing is they must want to break that addiction, and they must do everything that it can. Then I tell them that they have to And it's not for life. It's just because of their bad behavior, they have to put blocks and checks on all their devices wherever they were accessing pornography, whether it's a cell phone, a PC, a laptop, a tablet, whatever it is. You can get adult content blocks, and there are some great companies in the States that provide those services. So that has to be done. And I mean, I've even had guys here who've had to, while they were in this program, they had to go and buy a very cheap cell phone that can't get the internet, so they can only SMS and get and take calls. And that is just, and I tell them, it's not forever. This is a result of your bad behavior, but it's not for life. This too will pass once the trust has been built up and you feel you're strong enough that you won't be tempted. And then naturally, I believe they should have an accountability partner, someone they can talk to, someone they can trust, someone who will be non-judgmental, someone who will be confidential, and they can share with that person and just phone that guy. I'm not in a good space today, dude. Really, I've got this feeling in the pit of my stomach that's, there's trouble coming. And so, that the guy can say, well, let's meet for coffee. And he can phone him in that afternoon, say, how are you doing? Phone him the next morning. How was last night? And just help him through that patch. And I do believe you also need a support group or proper therapeutic intervention, let's call it that, from a person who is experienced in dealing with these sex and pornography type issues. And those are the basic things that I believe is needed, to help you break the cycle, the bondage to this addiction.
Wow, that's an excellent outline. I hope that helps a lot of our listeners out there. Is there any closing thought or anything you'd like to share for hope or encouragement for people who say, I've tried to quit 1,000 times, but I just keep slipping back?
I have seen so many people set free from this bondage, and there is hope. That is the most important thing to know. There is hope. I've seen guys whose relationships have been restored. I've seen families that have been restored. And it is such a win to see that. And it is possible. And it's very, very important that people know that this can be beaten. We're clean. You know what I mean? Then you just have to get up. You have to talk to whoever you're talking to and say, this is it. I'm not doing it again, and really move forward. But, like any recovery, there could be, I'm not saying there are, but there could be, a slight trip up along the way. But always get up and continue. Don't let that be the thing that says, I just can't get rid of this. I might as well just carry on regardless. No, they can never take away that portion of time beforehand. But as the human brain, we tend to think, I've fallen. I'm just hope. We don't look at what we've done prior to that and take that into account. And it's important to know that there is hope. And I've seen so many who have broken the shackles of this bondage.
Oh, man. Amen. That's awesome. That's awesome. Thanks for listening to this episode of the A to D from Addict to Disciple podcast. If you enjoy these podcasts, please share the link with your friends. I'd love to hear from any of you who have been or are addicted to pornography. Please contact me by email at davidfromatod@gmail.com or through my website, www.fromatod.org. Tune in Monday for our next episode. And as always, stay safe and stay strong.